All right, so the stereotypical notion of deviance focuses on the seamy, sensationalistic, disreputable behavior that is enacted by people on the fringes of society, outsiders, the powerless, lower class people. This behavior does fall into the category of deviance, but leaves a lot out. In sociology, we consider deviance to encompass any behavior that generates condemnation in some way or at least does not conform to the social expectations of a society. It's very important to note that when sociologists discuss or study deviance, we are not making a judgment about the behaviors or the people involved. Sociologists make observations about the social world and report on these observations. Thus, when we say that, when we say that long hair on a guy is deviant, we're not making a judgment about that. We're only making an observation on society's definitions about deviance. It is important to remember that and to leave our personal feelings about these issues at the door when we're discussing them on the discussion board or in any other aspects of our course. Because, like I said, in sociology, we are not making a judgment about these or calling people good or bad in any way. We are only making observations on how society defines deviance. So what is social deviance? It is any act that violates a social norm. So social deviance is any transgression of socially established norms. Even minor transgressions of these norms can be described as informal deviance. Formal deviance or crime involves the violation of laws. Another alternative definition of deviance is any act considered by social consensus or by the powerful at a given time and place to be a violation of some established rule or norm. So, how do we determine who and what is deviant? There will often be disagreement over what is deviant behavior and what is not. For instance, sex between adults. In our normal world, sex between adults is generally not considered deviant, but it is considered deviant under certain circumstances, such as when people are married to other people, or if a teen engages in sex with someone. For instance, if a 17-year-old engages in sex with an 18-year-old, this would be considered deviant because one of the people involved would not be an adult. Other examples of this where there's disagreement over what is deviant behavior might be considered as the use of birth control. The use of birth control is used widely in the United States. However, under certain circumstances, for religious norms, norms related to family traditions and beliefs, use of birth control is considered wrong and therefore not considered normative, and so would be considered deviant. Drug use is considered deviant in many social circles. However, the use of marijuana is now, widely used and even legal in many states, such as our own here in California. So there's a disagreement over whether or not the use of marijuana or drug use is deviant. Also, mental health disorders is another example of this. Most people would not consider a mental health disorder as deviant or wrong. We wouldn't make a judgment call about that. However, the behavior of some people with mental health disorders seems non-normative or out of the norm, and to some is considered deviant. So the answer to your second quiz question, where I give examples, choose the examples of deviance used in the lecture, you would choose all of the above. All right, so moving along. The majority determines who is deviant. So, for example, marijuana use. It will use marijuana use. It's such an interesting one for this topic of deviance. The majority of people in California apparently do not consider marijuana use as deviant and voted to legalize recreational marijuana in our state. And so in our particular state, marijuana is not considered deviant. However, in the state of Idaho, marijuana carries strict sentences and is considered deviant. And the majority there have determined who or what is deviant regarding marijuana laws. The important thing to know about this is that there are no objective properties that deviant acts share in common, except that they are perceived to be deviant by the majority. This is a very important point in our study on deviance, that there are no objective properties that deviant acts share in common, except that they are perceived to be deviant by the majority. In other words, deviance is socially constructed. So you remember when about social constructionism, we've been discussing this perspective since the beginning of the semester, and we have focused on how social constructionists focus on how ideas and objects are defined and why they are defined. That is the case with deviance as well. I show you this picture of the breakfast not because it's deviant, but because this is the example that I gave you for socially constructed behavior. Why do we eat this particular food? This is socially constructed. We could eat any different food for breakfast. More to the point, in our studies, marijuana and marijuana use is socially constructed to be deviant. However, if you look at the picture, we all recognize those leaves, but what you see is a plant. It's just a plant. There's nothing objective or intrinsically wrong with this plant. There's nothing that it shares with other acts of deviance, such as theft or homicide. It's just a plant, and we have constructed its use as deviant. And so all deviant acts, all definitions of deviance are socially constructed according to sociologists. As I mentioned before, there are two types of social deviance. There's informal and formal deviance. Remember that deviance is any behavior that substantially differs from the norm. So formal deviance, I'll start there, is any act that carries some sanction that has been approved by some sort of power that be, some sort of administrative body. So formal deviance such as homicide, drug use, and speeding, we have laws against them. Jaywalking, which is, I'm going to save that one for my next slide. Jaywalking is another example of formal deviance. These all have laws. And they don't necessarily have to have laws attached to them, but they have to have rules that carry some sort of formal punishment. So, like plagiarism at Ohlone College would be considered a formal act of deviance. Although there's not a law against it, there's a rule at Ohlone College against it in which you could be sanctioned for it or punished. So that would be considered a formal act of deviance. However, most deviant acts are informal deviant acts. These are things that are simply transgression against the social norms, such as cutting in line at the grocery store, picking your nose in public, answering your phone during a lecture. All of these things will incur people looking at you. Maybe they will say something to you. If you cut in line at the grocery store, maybe somebody will bump your cart. If you answer your phone during a lecture, maybe your teacher will tell you to turn it off, or you might even be sent out of the room. These incur some type of action directed at you. However, they're not laws and there are no formal punishments. So let's talk about those punishments. What we call punishments in regard to deviance in sociology is social control. And this is your third quiz question. So social control is the set of mechanisms that create normative compliance in individuals. Normative compliance is the act of abiding by society's norms or simply following the rules of group life. We learn these through socialization, which was our topic last week. In our society, we all want to make sure that everybody is following the social norms of society. And we learn to follow the norms of our particular culture through the process of socialization. One of the ways that we learn that is through social control. So social control might be formal or informal. Formal social control are rules. Like I said, they are laws and formal examples of punishment. So for jaywalking, this is your third quiz question. So for jaywalking, the formal social control for jaywalking is you'll get a ticket. Maybe not here. Where I live in Berkeley, I've never seen anyone get a jaywalking ticket, but I have gotten a jaywalking ticket in Los Angeles. So if you walk across the street where you're not supposed to, you might get a ticket, and this is an example of formal social control. So these are formal sanctions, rules, and laws that are overt expressions of group sentiment, and they force us to behave normatively. Informal social sanctions or informal social control are unwritten rules of social life that everybody knows. These are sanctioned in ways appropriate to the norm and situation. So an example of that is if you go to the movies. I just went to the movies this weekend, and there is somebody who is really loud in the movie theater, and you know that what people do when you're loud in the movie theater, they might kick your chair, they might shush you, they might call out, be quiet. There are a lot of ways that we let someone know they're not behaving normatively in a particular social situation, and this is an informal social sanction. So we learn these rules and their responses through socialization. We are all simultaneously enforcing the rules of society and having them enforced upon us. These can be both positive and negative. So a smile might be a positive form of social control when you smile at someone when they do right. Crime is a formal sort of deviance and incurs formal social control. Okay, that's all the time I have for this one. I am looking forward to